I'm chatting with Dave Wright, Director of Tabletop Scotland. He's the Chief Organiser, Head Honcho, and a very busy man. So thank you for taking the time to chat today. My name's Rich.
I'm Dave.
And this is Renegade Rolls. First questions for you. How's the event shaping up, and how are your stress levels?
Normally about this time of year is when it turns into the second day job. In fact, it's probably been like that since June. But the stress levels are fine. I think the only real concern, worry's probably a better choice of word than concern, is this is our first time in a new venue, right? So we've obviously done this before. We started the con in 2018. So we kind of sort of know what we're doing, but it's a new venue, which means there will be little things that will be different. In fact, there's quite a few things that are different. And so that adds to that worry of, have we actually got all of this thought through? I think in general, though, my stress levels at the moment are fine. My stress levels will probably spike during the event rather than the run up to it, because the worry is, not so much the worry, the control freak in me knows that doesn't matter how much we do beforehand, once we open the doors, it's kind of like, firefighting at that point. If anything does crop up, that's what we need to deal with. The event itself is shaping up really well. We have over 120 exhibitors, which is about 50 up from last year. Obviously, the move to Edinburgh next to the airport has been a draw for certain exhibitors that we've been trying to get to come for a number of years. Ticket sales are on the right path. They're up by roughly the same again as to what we had last year. So that's the right trajectory. And there's still 40 odd days to go before, at the time of recording, before they can buy, before we close that so they can buy on the day. We have enough chairs, which is a weird thing. At one point we thought we needed 5,000 chairs. We don't, thankfully, because if we did, we wouldn't be able to get them in Scotland.
What's gone better than expected?
Actually, that's a really good question. The exhibitor recruitment's been markedly different to previous years. There were a number of companies that we've spoken to pretty much every year since inception of the convention to see if they would come, and a lot of them, and the phrase I've got, it's just probably not the best phrase, is named companies. So people who you would recognise them from the shelf in a retail store, that sort of thing. A lot of them felt Perth was just slightly too far away, and logistically it was probably not very easy for them to get their team to. At least by moving to the Royal Helen Centre, they're able to essentially parachute their team in, and they can send all the stuff to us directly, and it's just there at the venue waiting for them. So companies like Chaosium, who make Call of Cthulhu, RuneQuest, Pendragon, and a few other games, they are here this year for the first year.
I saw you had Ravensburger, actually. I saw your Lorcana post. Yeah.
That's quite a big coup, I think, because that my friend Ian Hawthorne knows one of the people who looks after Ravensburger's physical presence at events in the UK. And he introduced me to Jess at another convention called Aircon in Harrogate. And I had probably wrongly, or ultimately wrongly, assumed that we were not at the scale yet that they would be interested in. But no, I had a really good chat with Jess and a couple of others from that team, and that's then just morphed into we're definitely coming. And as it turns out, they will have the biggest stand in the hall. Because they're not just bringing Lorcana, which is obviously their hotness from a card game perspective. They're bringing all their board game ranges as well, which is really cool. Because I'm a fan of their board game ranges. I've never played Lorcana, but I'm a fan of their board game ranges.
Tell me the epic backstory of Tabletop Scotland. How did it come into being, and how did you find yourself in the thick of it?
Creating this thing. I started the story by talking about 2014 when I had just turned 40 the year before, and my wife agreed to letting me spend the best part of $3,500 to go to the States, to go to Gen Con in Indianapolis, which coincided with the release of 5e. Now, I'd been to lots of conventions, small conventions in the UK, and a couple that were in Scotland at the time, and I'd always kind of gone, in a kind of egotistical way, I could do that better, right? Or naive way, perhaps, rather than egotistical. But when I went to Gen Con, which is a massive festival of the hobby, and it's an amazing experience. At that point in time, it was supposed to be a once-in-a-lifetime thing, but I've been back twice since then. It isn't just about playing games at these things. It isn't just about having an exhibitor hall at these things. It's about the whole experience of these things. And then the following year, and I just kind of noodled away in my brain. The following year, I went to UK Games Expo, which I think was the first time I went in 2015. And I got very drunk. Most of these stories probably involve people getting drunk. And my good friend Greg, who's my Gen Con buddy, basically got me very drunk on whiskey and encouraged me to, and only the way Greg can, by asking me lots of questions that he knew would get me animated. And I would start moaning about the lack of anything in Scotland. He was like, well, why don't you do something about it? I was like, okay, I will. But unlike a lot of drunken promises, I actually was like, okay, I'm going to do this. It did take, I mean, that was 2015, right? So we did, there was a group of us at that time, different group to what we have now, who were looking at being in Edinburgh, but we couldn't find a venue that ticked enough boxes. I've tried to list those boxes in previous times when I've been randomly talking about this, and I always get it wrong, but it's about ease of access, both from a people getting there and having exhibitors load and unload, and not being in the back of Beyond. So it has to be near good public transport and road transport and other forms of transport, right? Because people need to get there easily. Otherwise, they see it as a barrier to get in there. And there was a few other things as well. And we didn't really see, we saw, I don't know, like 4 venues over the period of a year and a bit. And we just kind of stopped. And then my wife, who owns a wool shop, a knitting shop in one of the villages near us, went to a yarn festival in Perth, and she said,
I think my mum was probably at that.
Well, it's one that's been going for years, and it's been in the Jura Centre for a long time, but it's now relocated because the Jura Centre's changed shape as a building, not physically, its interior's changed shape. And she was like, "You need to go and see it." So I made an appointment. I enlisted a couple of friends who were as foolish as I, and we went and saw it. And it was literally, the analogy I use, it's like when you walk into a house when you're looking for a new house and you can see yourself living there, right? That was exactly what this was like. I could visualize the event within the spaces that they had. And as soon as, I think that was like September 2017. So by October 2017, we signed a contract, we'd worked out roughly what we were doing at a high level, worked out our pricing plan. Everything just kind of rapid fire came out. Now, a lot of it was probably because I'd been thinking about it for, 2 and a bit years by that point. So it were very easy for us to go this. And then, so in 2017, we announced it. 2018, we had it. And we thought, this was part of our sales pitch, that we would have, the exhibitors would have like 400, 500 people at it. And we had over 1,000 people at it in the first year. Yeah. So immediately we were the biggest event in Scotland ever for the hobby. And that was like, okay, now what do we do type thing. So yeah, the evolution of the event since then has been 2019 increased in physical space by 100% and increased in attendance by 50%, which was one of those things that you go, no event grows 50%, surely, but it did. But I think in many respects, knowing how fickle people are, because I can be fickle, people probably waited to see if the first one was a success before they decided to attend, which is entirely fine. And then obviously the pandemic happened. And then we returned in 2022 in Perth, and it grew by 23%, something like that. And then again last year, it grew by about the same again. And it's kind of like we got to the point before last year. It was after 2022's event, really, that we knew we were running out of space, and there was this kind of threat hanging over the venue that it might close. because it's a council-owned building. It's run by an independent company, but it's a council-owned building, and we needed a plan. Now, this was something that, as I said to you before we started recording, I'm a project manager by day, so I think about plans in a kind of longer term kind of way, fairly good transferable skills in that sense. But I'd already started to think about this after 2019's event, because by growing by 50%, you're like, right, okay, if it keeps at that rate, we're going to have to move quicker than we really want to. And it was at that point I started looking around, and there's only 4 venues in the whole of Scotland that have got more square metres of usable space than the venue in Perth. One's in Aberdeen, 2's in Edinburgh, and one's in Glasgow. So, ultimately, we chose one in Edinburgh because they would give us a 3-year contract, and it would be the same date year on year, which the kind of second most likely option was the SEC in Glasgow, but they could only give us a 1-year contract and couldn't guarantee the same date year on year because of that.
So is that Tabletop Scotland 2025 and Tabletop Scotland 2026 confirmed? Or at least
yes,
it has a potential
in the sense that we have a contract that takes us to that point. And I always caveat these sorts of things with, we do this as a hobby, right? As a team, right? We don't take money out of this. The only thing the convention pays for is, from my team and I's perspective, is our accommodation that weekend and our food that weekend. That's it. Doesn't pay for anything else. And that's deliberate because we do this as a passion project, right? There is no desire for this to ever become our jobs. And I think it's one of those things where after the con each year, we genuinely have a conversation about, even just at an individual level, do you want to do this again? Because we put a lot into it, particularly over that weekend. I think it was 2022, I didn't sleep pretty much the whole weekend, right? Partly because of who I was sharing a room with. He kept asking me questions, but, and my brain would just have to respond. But at the same time, it's the sort of thing that you need to be able to want to do it. You need to want to do it, and you need to be able to do it. And real life has a fun thing where it makes things difficult for you to do things. But it's also just that visual demand on people's time. Do you want to do it again? So that'll be a conversation we'll have after this year. Don't get me wrong, I fully expect we will have it again and again and again. But it's one of those things of, until we've done it and we have that moment to decompress after it, that's when we ask ourselves the question, are we doing it again? So
the time to ask that question probably isn't like on the last day. It's like, hey, everyone's sitting in the pub being happy. No. It's probably like a week later when your brain's sort of chilled a bit.
Yeah, and we previously done 2-week breaks where we try not to talk to each other. We fail, but we try not to talk to each other for like 2 weeks after it, so that we have that time to ourselves. As the con continues to grow, and we're now based on last year's numbers, the 4th largest in the UK. There is like more and more of an expectation on us, if you follow me. So it's kind of why when we announced the move, I was very keen that we talk about, it's a 3-year contract, right? So, working on the assumption we do it again, then those are the dates that it will be. So we don't have to worry about announcing our dates per se. It's more about, does the team as a whole, or indeed parts of that team, want to do it again? Because it's an individual choice ultimately.
I've got a small confession to make. I am a tabletop convention virgin. Never been to one before in my life. As someone brand new, what can I expect from the weekend?
So if you, as an existing gamer, you can expect to see essentially a celebration of that hobby. So if you're there to play D&D, we have a lot of D&D. We have, I'm going to get this wrong, but it's roughly 400 seats of D&D being run over the 3 days. And if you like other RPGs as well, we have more of that. There's, I think, 15 tables of other RPGs over 7 slots multiplied by 5. I can't do the math. We also obviously have a lot of exhibitors, just over 120, and it's a blended option of We don't do a first come first served approach with our exhibitors. We curate, and there's a blend of RPG, there's a blend of board game, and there's a blend of everything else, as it were, makers, artists, whatever. So you will be able to explore that and experience new things to you, but you'll also find retailers in that mix who will be able to sell you things that you absolutely must have.
So I've been saving my money for a while. I've seen some of the things like, do I need a dice tower? I do need a dice tower. Do I need a custom everything? Of course I do.
Yes, and dice trays and stuff like that as well. And then beyond that, I mean, I mentioned the RPGs, but we have about, I think it's 2,600, something like that, 2,800 maybe, play spaces in the entire kind of space that we've got. So essentially, you can sit down and play board games all weekend, and we do have attendees who literally come when the convention opens. We kick them out when it shuts for the night. They come back in the morning and do the same. And that's what they do the entire weekend. They decamp to a zone and don't leave it. We also have a lot of events for games like Arkham Horror, the card game, and Crokinole, Marvel Crisis Protocol, and stuff like that. We have a games library for people to borrow games from. We have a gateway zone where people can learn easy-to-learn games or accessible games that we as a team choose. And one of our friends runs that zone for us as one of our volunteers. We have a second-hand market called the Bring and Buy. So if you have old games that are just sitting on your shelf and you know definitely you're never going to either read or play them ever again, then you can sell them. And a percentage of that goes to charity. Because we have a charity every year, and this year it's Alzheimer's Scotland. So yeah, there's a lot within the event that you can experience. But as a first-time attendee of any convention, I would just go with the flow. Do not try and overschedule yourself. Do not try and overcommit yourself, because you will either run out of steam or you'll miss things, right? So go slow. Maybe if you haven't already booked into some events, maybe book into a couple of events. But it's kind of like, do not overschedule yourself. I know people who do this at every convention. They always kind of basically are playing games from dawn till dusk every day. But they don't see the con then. They just play the games, which, is fine if that's what they want to do.
Yeah, brilliant. I think my plan for myself is I'm just going to chat to everybody. So as someone who's played games with friends before and is sort of slowly becoming part of the community, actually putting faces to sort of disembodied digital avatars and stuff, actually meeting people who share the same weird nerdy passions as me is absolutely the big draw for it. And if I get to play some games, get to do other stuff as well, then all the better.
Yeah, and it is something that it's fair to say that the relationships that we have built with our exhibitors over the year and our attendees over the year, many of them become fast friends. It's kind of like, that is very much, for me, part of the reason for our convention to exist. It enables people from not just all corners of Scotland, and not even necessarily just all corners from the UK, because we have had people from Spain, but we've got quite a few people from Spain coming this year, and North America and that, who come to the con because it's in Scotland.
So make it part of a weekend, go see Nessie, go see the castle, all of that.
Aye, stuff like that.
What are you personally looking forward to at this year's event? Are you playing or running any pre-booked tables? And do you have your eye on any sweet merchandise for yourself?
So, as is referred to, well, I don't play or run any games at Tabletop Scotland, but I am also notorious for not playing or running any games at any convention I go to. I use conventions as a social experience, and in the main, that's kind of what I do at Tabletop Scotland. I wander. I am minister without portfolio at the convention. My team all have things that they're doing. I'm there as contingency, and making sure everything is going on, which sometimes means I have nothing to do, and other times means I'm very busy. So I can't really plan that. I have been asked a couple of times to sit in on games, and indeed to sit on panels that we have, or indeed be the panel, i.e. have an interview with Dave type thing. And I'm like, maybe not at the convention is kind of where my head is, because anything could happen. But I think for me, I'm looking forward to seeing how the convention feels within this new space. It's always had a really nice vibe in Perth, and that maybe is a worry in a way of, does that vibe translate into this new venue? Now we've not done anything different other than move it, if you follow me, but the space is different, and there's a lot more of it. So that's something I'm intrigued by that, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it is and seeing what we learn from it. Personally, though, I'm just looking forward to seeing people I've seen come to each of our events, and buying stuff. I am notorious for not buying anything at conventions, which is kind of weird. I didn't buy anything at UK Games. No, that's a lie. I bought one thing. I bought 2 BattleTech mats when I was at Expo. But I don't tend to buy anything at conventions. But the variety of exhibitor we have this year, and certainly some of the named ones we have coming, as I used the phrase earlier, there will no doubt be something that catches my eye, but there's nothing specific. Yeah, that's probably fair. I think there will be a lot more to tempt me this year than there has been in previous years. So that's going to be an interesting challenge.
I've got sort of visions of myself, sort of Santa's sack, just sort of full of things, trying to get on the bus back to Glasgow at the end of the day. We'll see. How would you assess the health of board games, TTRPGs overall, and what do you predict for the future of the hobbies?
Yeah, I mean, the explosion of RPG content, i.e. produced products, whether it's PDF or in print, over the last 5 to 10 years, let's say, whether it's directly related to 5E's launch in 2014, certainly a lot of the 5E stuff is, but not necessarily all of it. And then that question of, is that bubble about to burst, is probably there. But then after the fun time that everybody had with the OGL drama last year, there's probably something about, well, actually maybe that reinvigorated that market. And I think in many cases it probably did. Is that sustainable? That is a $1,000,000,000 question, in fact. I mean, I think from a convention scene perspective, Expo grew by, I can't remember what the percentage was, 18%, 14%, something like that. And they're a big event. They're the third largest in the world. Dragon Meet, which is in London, they grew by about 12 to 14%, I think. And Aircon grew about the same, actually, which is in Harrogate. And they're the 3 cons that are bigger than us. And we try and model certain financial projections, et cetera, based on them. But I see Tabletop Scotland growing roughly 20 to 25% this year, roughly. It might be more than that, because on the day you never know, right? But the sustainability of that in an environment where economically people are not necessarily flush with cash is something that is not lost on us. But I think the hobby in general, I mean, board games wise, 3,500 to 4,000 new board games are released every year.
Wow.
Right? I mean, how is that sustainable is probably the question. I mean, there are board games not on my shelves behind me that are in storage at the minute because we're getting stuff done to the house, that I actually haven't played yet. And I've had, in the case of a few of them, I've had them for more than a year. And there's role-playing books in the shelf behind me, which I haven't read yet either. So why am I buying more? Because habitually within the hobby, we like to collect things. We buy things because they give us joy. So I don't see that necessarily slowing down. It's one of the few discretionary hobbies that people will resist the urge to spend less on unless they're making a conscious choice to do it. But no, I think that the range of product that's coming out within the RPG scene right now, and the number of small indie publishers that have grown to be mini publishers rather than indie publishers is a sign that the hobby is growing continuously, which is great because more gamers is exactly one of the reasons why we created Tabletop Scotland. Right, we wanted to enable more people to become gamers.
I think from my own perspective, having sort of seen like D&D's been the default as far as I'm concerned. It still is, to be honest.
It still is.
Seeing the explosion of different systems, and I suppose where I am just now in the hobby, I'm now seeing. I get all those emails from DriveThruRPG saying, "Hey, here's 10 new games you've not played." Like, I know, but I can't afford them. But trying to choose, it's not a luxury choice. I can choose which ones to play or which systems to investigate and delve into, and there is something for everyone now. Which maybe it always has been, but it maybe hasn't been as
visible.
And
I think it is one of these things that I think the challenge I'm with PDF as a way of consuming the product. I have a lot of PDFs. I have a lot of PDFs. I have no idea. I don't even want to think about how many I've got. But normally what I find is if I'm planning to run it, then I want it in PDF. But if I'm planning to read it, I want it in hard copy. But that's me. Everyone's different in that sense. I know people who exclusively buy hard copy and who exclusively buy PDF. And it's not just always a commercial decision they're doing that for, it's because that's the means in which they consume it. So yeah, I do think that the explosion of indie RPGs in particular and the reaction to the OGL fun times it has created a lot of new publishers as a result, and enabled people like Cobalt Press in particular to take a step removed from being a 5e derivative. They've created their own system, which is 5e derivative, but it's now their own system in that sense.
And it's interesting seeing other creators doing that as well. So like Critical Role with the Daggerheart system with MCDM and all of that. It's and
it's the sort of thing that there's people like there's the Esper Genesis RPG, which is a sci-fi 5e, and it's been around for years. And I remember when it came out, and it was kind of like, I think this was before Starfinder came out actually, as a kind of Pathfinder derivative. It was very much that's cool, but there will always be. I can hear their voices in my head. There will always be people within the hobby who go, "But why are you using 5e for that?" It's like, well, people know it. It's not always about being the perfect system. For me, it's more about the play group and are you having fun? Where it's the best RPG in the world or not?
And the best RPG in the world is the one that you're playing every week and the one that you're enjoying.
Very much so. Very much so.
The fun thing is, the thing that fascinates me is that a group of players, the GM, can have fun for decades without spending a penny on the hobby.
Yes.
And that's where it gets from a business sense, it makes complete sense that we've got 6th edition or 5.5 or whatever they choose to call it coming out, because that's the only time they can make the money from these groups, short of doing the online permanent subscription D&D Beyond thing, which I will probably buy or probably pay for, because that's how we play, and it is the best online tool set.
You use that tool set, you use that product, and that makes it easier for you. And it is the sort of thing. I remember. Being at Gen Con in 2014 when 5e was launched, and people were very unsure about. Well, a lot of the designers at the time felt this would be the last edition of D&D, but they felt that because of some of the impacts of 4e from a commercial perspective and fan reaction to it. But 5th edition is. Someone's going to call me on this. I believe it is the longest standing single edition of D&D, and the 2024 refresh or 5.5 or whatever we want to call it is by most accounts at least mostly backwards compatible, but of course they'll want you to buy the new books. I will end up buying the new books, even though I'll probably just buy them again on D&D Beyond and use it through that, right?
I kind of resign myself to this now. I count myself very lucky. I'm in a position I can afford such nonsense, and that's obviously not the case for everyone.
No, not at all.
Yeah,
but it is the sort of thing. I mean, I remember I might have blogged about this before when I used to have a blog, but changing the hobby is a good thing, and new editions is a good thing because it's a way of invigorating the hobby in a way, even if that new version of the game isn't as good as, in your objective opinion, the one you've been playing for years. But to your point, there are still people who are playing basic D&D. Or
and having a great time.
And having a great time with it, or one of the derivatives like Old School Essentials, which is on my shelf, because they recognise that's a style of play they like. So why would they change? Well, you don't have to. That's the point. There's no need to buy these things, I suppose is the point.
Given the eternal shortage of game masters, do you see AI as having a place in the ecosystem, either as an AI game master or perhaps maybe some new kind of hybrid thing that could allow some new forms of play? This is my controversial question for the day, by the way. I get one every time.
It's genuinely something I've been pondering. And I'll start the answer by saying generative AI from a text and image perspective can go in the bin. Where AI is used to provide guidance or assist in achieving something, it's just a routine that's been generated within a computer that's got a little bit of additional logic around it. And I'm not that kind of techie at all, but that's how I see it. Can I see an AI DM? No, I can't, because it would require, I don't know what kind of processing power that would need, but it would probably be quite a flat player experience for that. You need that, in my opinion, that human interaction to be able to do it. Otherwise, you're just about playing a board game like Descent, where you're going through a dungeon, but the game is the game master type thing, and someone can take on that role, but you're following a script. I think where I can see it, specifically in the case of D&D, I can see where, because I've got a Discord bot, Avery, which I was desperately trying to remember as I came to that point, that I can see them adding AI type functionality to that to aid the player or GM if they use that bot. And that is entirely reasonable to me, as long as they're using it within their own kind of ecosystem, right? But not for generating art and not for generating text, because that's plagiarism, stealing, depending upon how you look at it.
Yes. As I've said before, if you want to use AI to automate away your fun, you have at it, but don't you dare use these tools to automate away someone else's creativity. And that's
exactly.
That's the difference. And they're just scraping up everything and spitting them out again.
It is, and I have the luxury of being friends with lots of comic book artists, and a lot of them have been impacted by this, where their artwork has essentially been regenerated by somebody else, by one of these systems, and it is basically their artwork. But it's just different enough that it isn't their artwork, and people are selling it. It's like, no, wait a minute, that belongs to so and so. You can't do that, but they can because of that how it is. Don't get me wrong, every new technology like AI of this is disruptive, and it's disruptive in a good way, because ultimately it'll be painful initially, but in theory, hopefully, it becomes contained after a period of time and we come out of it better. But obviously there are people who are being impacted in it right now, from an art perspective in particular. I don't know what the impact of ChatGPT and stuff like that is yet on people who write stuff, but I'm sure it is having an impact.
One of the things which I really love about D&D TTRPGs in general, it's one of the few things I can do entirely analog.
Yeah,
I can be just sitting around a table with my friends, and why would I want to automate away my fun?
And you're right. It's sort of thing that, I mean, obviously during the pandemic, a lot of people gravitated towards online tools. And working from home during the pandemic, I spent all my day on Zoom. And then I would be on Roll20 or whatever tool I was using in the evening. And there is an element of fatigue with that. And being able to disconnect. And it is actually one of the things about bringing it back to Tabletop Scotland in a way, having an analog experience is actually very good for the soul, in my opinion. So it's recognizing that disconnecting and actually interacting with people, regardless of how comfortable you are with that, because obviously some people are not, for very good reasons, whether they're on the autistic spectrum or whatever, that is something that is good for you, ultimately. Spending all your time online is something that probably isn't as healthy as it is perceived at times.
Is it fair to assume you have a long history of playing TTRPGs?
Yeah.
Okay, that's not my question, but
Yeah.
the actual question is, do you have an all-time favourite memory from around the gaming table? Either glorious victory or terrible but hilarious defeat?
I have a couple, but there's one in particular that's popped in my head, so I'll go with that. So I've been playing RPGs, D&D specifically, since 1984, and I am 51 a week on Monday next week, the time of recording. So it is kind of like I've been playing pretty much since basic D&D came out in the UK, at least, and then I gravitated from there into other things. So the memory which pops into my head is my original kind of playgroup, who were the guys I was at school with. We were playing, I think it was first edition AD&D at the time rather than basic, and it was some homebrew nonsense that I'd come up with, or a scenario from White Dwarf or Dungeon Magazine or something like that I'd butchered into being something. They were in a cavern underground, and they found a magic item, or they found a horn, more accurately, which back in first edition, there was a magic item called the Horn of Collapsing. So Craig decided, as the thief, that he was going to blow that horn, and sure enough, they all died. And the interesting little bit of factoid about that is we're all now in our early 50s, and that is still cast up at him whenever we're all together and normally fairly drunk. Because none of those guys play RPGs anymore. They've grown up, or whatever you would coin it. But that memory is something that we all share, and it is just every so often it comes up in conversation. It's just like, so I'll need to let them know that I've now outed them on YouTube. But yeah, that stands out. There's lots of memories though, and I think that is one of the really powerful things about all tabletop games, but particularly RPGs. The narrative and the story that goes within it, you're able to then share that story as a group. And one of the first times after we moved here, when I thought I'm moving to the East Nuka 5, it's kind of like, how many gamers are going to be here? And I got rid of my entire collection before we left Glasgow, which was painful. And I rediscovered role-playing through a group in Edinburgh. And I was playing with some people, a game called All Flesh Must Be Eaten, which is by Eden Studios, which is basically a zombie apocalypse game, but it's a funny zombie apocalypse game, or it can be. And my first memory of going to Orc in Edinburgh was Robert, who at that time must have been 15, maybe 16, running that game. And I was just blown away by his energy, never mind anything else. And he was loving it, and it was so fun. I can't remember anything about it other than we were in a helicopter at one point with zombies trying to get on top of the helicopter, which is obviously a bad thing to do, but zombies don't know any better. So body parts flying everywhere. But it is that sort of thing that you do kind of have these little pockets of memory. And I've ran lots of campaigns, whether you would call them that or not, I don't know. But in some cases I have, predominantly within D&D. But I've ran a lot of other stuff, and I've played a lot of other stuff as well. And there's always little memories that pop into your brain. But it was just that one of Craig that just popped out of my head there and now, so I'll have to tell him.
Not brilliant. I know for me that, running TTRPGs in the pandemic, especially when we couldn't have any adventures ourselves, we couldn't go on holiday, couldn't do anything else. Well, we still get, like, if you tell stories about your mate being drunk in Magaluf or something, we had that story of, I don't know, someone was sliding on their backside because they failed a acrobatics roll and slid on the battlements and almost off the edge of the turret and almost got eaten by the dragon. Yeah. Steve.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
I'm bringing that up all the time as well. It's amazing.
And it is one of these things where, yeah, I was a big cynic of online RPGs until the pandemic, and I had no choice, right? But you can have a similar, not the same, a similar experience online. And obviously, for a lot of people, that is their only means of doing it, either geographically or whatever, or availability, because scheduling is the enemy of any RPG group. But it is the sort of thing that it isn't about the technology or whatever it is. It's about that shared experience in that, and those moments where you all laugh out of character and are just kind of, and you just can't control it, and it takes you 10 minutes to recompose yourselves and continue. I don't know if you listened to Mastering Dungeons with Sean Merwin and Tia Sabadia, but the two of them,
yeah.
They were talking about engagement in games but more from the point of view of how long it takes for a turn to complete. You take your turn, you miss, right?
Yeah.
You've now got 15 minutes to wait. And that lag between your turns is bad game design, as Sean would refer to it.
Yeah.
But it's also, a lot of that's on the individual. They need to stay engaged because you don't want them coming back and going, right, what's everybody done then?
Yeah. No, definitely. I actually did a video with a bit about that, and firstly, I agree. It's if you're playing like high level D&D or something, it can take a full 15 minutes to get around the table.
Yeah.
And if you're making a death saving throw or something, you roll one dice. That's you done. There's no decisions, no choices. So something I try and do if people are in a situation where maybe there's combat happening elsewhere, or they're on death saving throws, I'll do the whole your life flashes before your eyes, or say you have a vision of your past, you have a glimpse of the future, get a little bit of just a little bit of sort of narration and interaction with them to keep them in the loop, and that can work well. Something I actually really enjoyed with Daggerheart, that I ran a 10 shot of that recently, is it doesn't do formal initiative. You just go when you feel like it, and everyone adds a token to the tracker, and everyone can see if you've got a friendly group who are going, "Ooh, you've not had a turn in a little while." But there's no initiative. It's just so fast going between.
Yeah, because there was something.
I think it's a really slick design. How well it would work for, I don't say competitive, like if there's an Adventurers League equivalent or something, not sure.
Well, it would be the sort of thing that, there's cooperative board games where they talk about people quarterbacking the game, i.e. basically telling other people what to do, and that can happen when you have strong personalities in role-playing games. I think the other bit about that is, I remember James Hake, who used to write for Was He wrote Dragon Heist, and he's on another podcast that I listened to. He was talking about it from the point of view of if you have people who are shy, they will either like the Daggerheart initiative system or they will not like the Daggerheart system.
Yeah.
It will be chalk and cheese for them. They will like watching other people see how they get on and enjoying that as a spectacle. But if they're then a passenger rather than a participant, you have to question why they're at the table in some way.
Why aren't you watching an actual play or something?
Exactly.
But the thing is, I've got personal story time. I've got a few friends who are chronically shy, kind of like to the extent of have very cleverly managed to arrange their lives to never leave the house. Yes. And anything I can, because they love games, they love, especially like computer games and things, but getting them around the table playing TTRPGs, encouraging like tools of making things easy for them is so interesting. So even a technique I learned, let's just go past the parcel. If I was to say, hey, there's the dragon in front of you and it's bearing down on you, what do you do? That's a lot for someone, especially if they're not expecting. I try and be sort of give good foreshadowing and stuff, but to say things like agree at the table, it's okay if you don't know what to do, and me as GM or whoever can give them an easy out, give them a route so they're still participating, still being a part of it, but at the level that's comfortable to them. And it does need your other players to be kind as well. So I'm in a luxury position where I get to choose my players very carefully. And not all of my friends are right for my games at all, and lots of my friends aren't actually right for every table. So if I'm doing
and there is no such thing as every table will click for everybody. That scenario doesn't work because you have to find your play group, and I think for me, and also your game or games, as the case may be, because for me that's one of the selling points of RPGs at a convention is you can try things. But just on the aspect of people who are shy, etc. We've had a quiet room at our convention every year for people who get stressed in loud environments or in busy environments or whatever it is. And it didn't really get used in the first 2 years, but funnily enough, after the pandemic, it got used a lot because it's the sort of thing that people weren't used to being in that number of people again. And also there was a spike in people developing those behaviours, conditions, whatever choice of word it is. I'm never sure the right one. But that, and so we've deliberately, we've had a lot of debate about where the quiet room is this year, but we've now settled on where it's going to be, and it's a big space that we're giving up for that, which we are paying for after all, but it's the right thing to do for our attendees.
Yes, and the mental health crisis post-COVID, if we are post-COVID, is so much bigger than is being acknowledged. That's a topic for a very separate conversation. But
it is, and it's why during the pandemic I ran an online RPG convention for charity. First year we did it for leukemia, for a kids' leukemia charity. Second year we did it for Penumbra, a mental health charity, because this hobby is beneficial to people who have mental health difficulties.
Yes, massively. I had a fascinating conversation with someone got in touch with me through my channel, actually. Said they're a working therapist in the US and use DnD TTRPGs as a method of working with not every client, but particular ones who they may have difficulty sort of emoting their own feelings, but running a game or something and say, well, how did your character feel in that? They were sad, they felt betrayed, they felt this. And it's so carefully done, so well guided. I thought about doing a video with them, but I then thought, no, I'm not qualified to know where that should go.
It is one of the things, because there is I don't know if it's the same group. There's a group in the States called the Bodhana Group, Bodhana, and they literally, that's what their model is. They use role playing as therapy. And they work very closely with a convention, I think it's Gamehole Con, they work very closely with, which is in October. And that's very much their stick, and it is recognising that is something that this hobby can help with.
One lovely thing I found is that so many of the people involved in this hobby are just switched on to neurodiversity, to mental health. And from the outside, you see nerds around a table rolling funny-sided dice, but actually what's going on between the individuals and what people are getting from that is so much more.
Absolutely.
It's so good to see.
It's one of the things that, I suppose it is one of the reasons why I do it, why I created the event, but it's probably not as forefront as it could be in some ways, but that's why we always partner with a charity, so that they can help us involve the event to cater for people, whether it's autism last 2 years and this year Alzheimer's, but more from a cognitive learning perspective. So yeah.
For the fools, the massive fools who haven't yet got their tickets yet, what should they do, and how can they turn their sorry lives around?
So they should go to tabletopscotland.co.uk. There's a big button on the front page of the website, which is called Buy Tickets. If they want to play in any events, they need to have bought their ticket first. If there are spaces in those events, when it comes to the convention, and therefore they have forgotten to buy their ticket or didn't realise that they need to buy their ticket, then we will have those spaces available to people to book into when they get there. But that's normally a bit of a scrum, if I'm honest. But they should, as I say, they should go to the website and buy their ticket. And we offer a variety of tickets. 10 and unders come free, and we do see a lot of families coming. In fact, I think it was 11% of our attendees were under 16 last year, something like that. So fairly sizable chunk of the audience is that family demographic, which is fantastic. But yeah, the con is on the 6th to the 8th of September. It's at the Royal Highland Centre, which is right next door to Edinburgh Airport. We have the luxurious position of having, as a result of this, 5,000 car parking spaces, compared to, I think it was 300 in Perth, which was always a bit challenging. So yeah, it is. Yeah, go to the website. It's all there. You can also order your Tabletop Scotland t-shirt if you want one, or your Tabletop Scotland dice tray if you want one. Stuff like that through that. And it is then, but we will be selling them on the day. So if for whatever reason, whether it's a payday thing, whether it's a whatever thing, if you cannot make that commitment at this point in time, either because you don't know your work shifts or whatever, then, we are selling tickets in the door, and they are the same price as they are online, right? So we currently, up till now, have resisted the urge to do a difference between those two things. We may look at that for next year, but that's very much a next year thing, not a now thing. I think that's kind of the main thing. It is really just, if you want to see what we've got on, all the events are listed on the website, all the panels, because we've got various panels, all the exhibitors, and we've got various other little bits of information, FAQs, how to get here, accommodation options, all sorts of stuff. So it is hopefully a one-stop shop. If there is anything missing that is blatantly obvious and none of my team have noticed, please let us know.
Thank you so much, David, for taking the time to chat with me. And I will see you at Tabletop Scotland, at a table literally near you, rolling an improbable succession of ones.
Excellent. Excellent.
Cheers.
Cheers.